Welcome to Lost Anchorage, where Crude investigates the mechanisms of crime and violence in Anchorage, Alaska. My name is Cody Liska, and I'll be your host. Through research and interviews with professionals, law enforcement, and those affected by crime, I hope to build a better understanding of whether or not Anchorage is in fact becoming more dangerous. By the end of this series, I hope to create a portrait of crime in our city, for better or for worse.
My name is Aaron Roberts, and I was an Anchorage police officer for 20 years, a little over 20 years. While I served in that capacity, I was on patrol, and my patrol time was spent mainly in the downtown area, a little bit Muldoon, but mostly downtown. I was also a detective in robbery assault, vice, and metro, which was narcotics. I finished out in warrants, and which is not as cool as it sounds, the last part. Yeah, and also I was a negotiator. I was on the negotiation team, which works hand in hand with SWAT, and I was team lead for that at the time that I retired, as well as a training officer for them. And I taught defensive tactics in the academy.
All right, so you're definitely a good person to talk to about this stuff then.
Thanks.
So you were an officer and a detective in the Anchorage Police Department. What was your daily routine like, maybe as an officer compared to a detective?
So as an officer, I primarily worked downtown in Fairview. One of the reasons I liked it is because it's one of the more densely populated areas in Anchorage. Always a lot of things going on, and a lot of the calls didn't require a lot of paperwork. Just to be real. And
can you explain what that means?
By paperwork, it's once been said that police work is like you go to where there's chaos, you stop the chaos, and then you write a story about it. Depending on the level of chaos, you have to write a bigger story. And all that is what I mean by story is the documentation that you need to take it to the next level, either prosecution or whatever. The type of situations and crimes in the downtown area required less documentation or simpler documentation than maybe in other places.
Could you give me an example of a situation that would entail less documentation?
Okay, so if you're dealing with a shoplifter or even an assault, a physical assault, or a problem where you're dealing with somebody that's drunk, that's going to require less documentation than maybe a domestic violence incident or a fraud dealing with financial crimes or things like that. Because
it's more cut and dry?
Pretty much, yeah. It's more cut and dry. Person A attacked person B, and you're getting the information and going forward like that.
And so those were the kind of cases that you generally dealt with?
Downtown, yeah, those were more the cases. Downtown's an interesting situation. You've got, the normal working folk that come and go every day and don't live downtown. You've got the Brother Francis shelter and the soup kitchen. There's also the state office where people get state assistance right there on 4th Avenue. So in that area, and then you go down to like 15th and Gamble, you've got cars and the liquor store is there, and there was another liquor store that's now a laundromat. Once you get to that area, you have a location where there's lots of services and a lot of people that are indigent, and then you also have the normal working stiffs, the normal working civilians coming back and forth every day. So once you get that mix, and then there's also lower income housing. Once you get that mix, then and where that merges, that's when you get more action as far as it makes it more interesting because you're dealing with lots of different calls, as opposed to like the south side of town. There's various places in the south side of town where you've got, more well-to-do people and less street-level crime.
What about the east side, like Muldoon area?
So if I was to talk about the busiest areas, the way Anchorage is split, it's split into north and south. So you've got sectors north and sectors south. And without getting too much into the detail about that, you can use kind of Tudor Road as the boundary, or 15th. Anyway, Mountain View and Muldoon are busy. Fairview is busy as well. Those are the busiest areas on the north side. On the south side, it would be Spenard.
And is there any crime specifically that happen in those areas, or is it kind of all crimes happening everywhere all the time?
Well, there's a sprinkling of crimes in all those areas. When you're talking about Muldoon, Muldoon always seemed to have more domestic violence calls are happening in Muldoon. Once you get around the hospitals, obviously, I'm talking about Providence and A&MC, you have to deal with assaults and people that have come to the hospital, and those oftentimes require a lot of paper. The fact is, the area around the hospital was often affectionately dubbed the hospital bitch, because you're kind of like trapped at the hospital area taking those calls, which typically will require a lot of paper. And those are the A&MC, Providence, even Alaska Regional somewhat, but A&MC and Providence more so. I don't know, it seemed like everybody was getting shot and then going to Providence. But ARH, with its proximity to Mountain View, people would do that as well. You'll have your fair share of DVs in Mountain View also, thefts, assaults, and shootings. Primarily, you'll see Mountain View and Fairview as far as shootings and things of that nature. Spenard is where, and I spent a lot of time in Spenard when I was a detective in Vice. You have a lot of street level prostitution and drugs in Vice, and also you have like some homeless people come from downtown. But most of the time downtown, especially surrounding Brother Francis, you have a lot of assaults and things like that with the homeless population. There's a whole unit dedicated to just dealing with the homeless and assaults that happen that are kind of like off the beaten path. I mean, they're the people that everyone sees, but there are a lot of homeless people living in the woods, and they assault each other, and there's rapes and things like that happen, and a lot of that goes unseen and unreported.
And so those homeless camps that you just brought up, are those a big problem?
They have, the whole 20 years that I worked in APD, those have been a big problem.
In what way?
There are a lot of crimes that occur. There's a lot of alcohol. So you have the medical issues with people. I mean, being homeless is not a life where, you're getting the best medical attention or worrying about what you're eating and you're drinking to excess. There's a lot of people that are mentally ill in these camps, and they're preying on each other. And oftentimes it's a situation where, as the police, we want to do what we can to help people, but there's also a culture of inclusion and not cooperating with the police. So, and also there's danger to get to those places. You're kind of like in their domain, There's numbers, there's weapons, there's people that are mentally ill, and you kind of have the challenge of going into these places and get enough information so that you can put people in jail and make a difference and help victims, and you really can't because, I'm not going to say you can't, I'm going to say it's very difficult because of the fact that you have that remoteness, you're dealing with the elements. Because, they're out there, it's a 365 game for them. It's not a situation where, okay, I'm going to be homeless in the summer when it's nice, and then during the winter I'm going to, come back inside. I mean, people are out there. Like right now, there's snow, it's break up, it's muddy. People are out there right now. I could bring you to homeless camps right now that I know. The CAP team, which is the team that was kind of tasked with removing all those camps, and they were fighting a battle because it was a situation where lots of different people got involved. I'm not sure if the ACLU got involved, but it was like, you can't take people's stuff. You have to give them a warning, like you got to leave it 10 days. I mean, there's all kinds of different hurdles that made it difficult for, I mean, because of course the general public is like, hey, just get rid of them, you know? Well, easier said than done. We can't just get rid of the homeless camp because, you know, people have rights as far as their property. And then there's the fact that all of these places that cater to them are down there, right? You have like the Soup Kitchen, you have Brother Francis, you have Beans Cafe. You can't kind of put the homeless population so far that they can't take advantage of these entities in the community that are trying to help them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a sticky situation, I think, because like you said, you know, those people need to be around those resources.
Mm-hmm.
So you had brought this up a little earlier. You had been talking about the type of crimes that exist in certain areas of Anchorage.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any cases you still think about?
Cases that I still think about. So as opposed to individual cases, I think I want to take a moment to talk about things that that maybe a lot of people don't know about. So during my time in the Anchorage Police Department, working as a detective, I worked in robbery assault, I went to Vice, and then I went to narcotics, and then I went to burglary before going to warrants. So when I first came to robbery assault, it was from patrol. I went from patrol to, you know, I did backgrounds, and I actually hired people and brought them into the police department. And then I went to robbery assault. And being a detective is a lot different than being on patrol. You can kind of see, I mean, as a patrol officers see things that people are not privy to, right? It's, you know, boots on the ground, street level. Once you get to detectives, you get to go more in depth in different areas and kind of see what people's motivations are. As a patrol officer, people don't bring you the intel to kind of let you know what the rest of the story is. When I was a detective in robbery assault, I remember when first coming up here, there was the big argument in Anchorage was, is there a gang problem? Is there not a gang problem?
And when was this?
When I first came up here?
Yeah.
This was like 93, 94. You know, that argument was going on at that point. When I was in robbery assault, that was 2002 is when I became a detective in robbery assault. And that, for the first couple of years, well, pretty much all my time in robbery assault until I went to Vice in 2006. So for 4 years, I was chasing gangs. I know at one point they had a gang unit. They kind of disbanded it. This was before I got into the ranks of detectives. Actually, I think it was before I got on APD. And so you got to know who the various factions were, the difference between gangs in Anchorage and gangs in other places. And it's something that makes the Anchorage gangs more dangerous. In other places, gangs are about, there's a hierarchy, there's a structure, there's tradition. There's shot callers or OGs that will be like, hey, let's not do this. We're going to bring attention to ourselves. They're also a little bit easier for the police to categorize because they're often built on different cultures or different races being in a specific gang or even different locations as far as where they live. And that's somewhat true. You have like, you know, gangs in Mountain View that are in Mountain View and Fairview, you know, claims Fairview. But oftentimes here you have kids that will go out to low 48 and, you know, hang out with some Bloods or some Crips down there and come back and be like, hey, this is what I am, you know, and then they'll make a little setup here. They don't have the permission of the people outside. They don't have the backing. They don't have the oversight. Really, like it's funny to
They're
use,
wild cards.
Yeah, it's funny to use that word when we're speaking about gangs, but they don't have the oversight, and they could get pissed off and just start shooting. A lot of the shootings that I dealt with in the early 2000s, it wasn't really necessarily because of territory or drugs or, I mean, a fair share, there were drugs involved, but a lot of them had to do with girls. Like, these are like, you know, back when I was growing up, it'd be someone would get into a fist fight over a girl, you know, whereas in Anchorage, well, these guys are in gangs, and so they're going to get into shootouts over girls, and, well, the other person, they have their guys that are their friends that are also claiming gangs. And so they'll shoot back. So back then you had people like Soldier Crew, Sons of Samoa, Hamo Tribe, Iceberg Clique. Those were the guys that we were chasing around trying to make cases on. And what I quickly discovered, and as a black detective, okay, people would be like, hey, come here. They take me to the side. This is what happened, but I'll never testify, because you're black. I'll tell you, like, this is what happened, but I'm not going to pick the person out of a lineup and I'm not going to testify. And it wasn't necessarily, there's the no snitching thing that is in the streets. But I mean, there's a situation where lots of times people are afraid. I mean, the people that were involved, and this is stuff that Joe Public is clueless about, that all this stuff was going on. And we talked before a little bit before the podcast about like danger. Is it more dangerous or less dangerous? At that time for the general public, I mean, because they're letting bullets fly, but the only people that were really getting touched was the people that were involved in the gang, So you can look at like per capita, are things dangerous or things not? Well, I mean, it depends on what neighborhood you lived in, and it depends on what time of night you're out, So that was, we had a hard time. We tried to get a lot of those guys and put them in jail, but we came to that problem where people won't testify to what they're doing because they're afraid. I moved over to Vice, and Vice, for people who don't know, that dealt with street level prostitution, street level drugs, and gambling. We were quickly told that we could not do gambling after we did our first big gambling bust. The FBI was involved. There was some kind of prominent Anchorage businessmen that were involved. And we quickly earned the wrath of people that were like, why is APD doing this? There are people shooting and I just want to play poker and you're busting up our game. So that was, I mean, but it was fun, right?
So gambling was demoted as far as...
As far as we're not going to pay attention to gambling, we're just going to pay attention to street level prostitution and street level drugs. But the thing about that is I talked about the progression between, from robbery assault to Vice to Metro. The thing about it is...
Your jobs.
All those kids that were shooting up Anchorage that we were trying to get when I was in robbery assault that we couldn't get, federal task forces involved with, APD detectives and cops and feds made cases on all those guys, And so in the drug world, it's like, wow, okay, we can actively go out and proactively hunt people and put them in jail, where through the conventional means as robbery assault kind of being reactive, like, okay, somebody gets shot, we come out of our bed in the middle of the night and talk to people. We weren't getting anywhere with that, but those same guys that were doing all that shooting, they're doing federal time for the drug stuff. Some of them were getting out, but so it was like, wow, it was a whole different world. And also in Vice, I was involved with Jerry Starr. Donna Webster was a notorious pimp who trafficked in young girls, underage girls. And, props to all my Vice boys. You guys know who you are. Angry and Wheezy and the Deacon and Big Country. Anyway, so that was a situation where it was a long case. It took over a year. And the way to get into a pimp, now this was a pimp that we put him in jail. He's in jail for over 40 years, but he did so much. I mean, it was pervasive. When I first came to Anchorage in the early 2000s, remember back in the days they used to have phone books? I know they don't now, right? Because of the internet. But
I remember phone books.
In phone books, if you pulled out a phone book, he would have his escort services in the yellow pages and with military discount and all that. I mean, and have like a little star. Because of course there was millions of different services to kind of give you the illusion that there's different ones to choose from. But if there was a little star next to it, that would be, that's a Donna Webster thing, And that case is funny because you talk about if there's a case that sticks out in my mind, this was a case where in order to develop the case, we would have to arrest street girls and kind of like, work them backwards to get to the pimp. And when we made that arrest, there was a briefcase. He had a briefcase, and in the briefcase was a fetus from his bottom bitch. Like, so like in the prostitution world, your bottom bitch is like your girl that's like, your best girl, but like she gets her ass whipped the most too. But she's the girl that, takes care of the other girls, keeps them in line, kind of like the what's the word? I'm not gonna say mama-san, because mama-san is like a pimp in their own self, because we did massage parlor cases also. But so basically he had given her an abortion, and the fetus was, obviously she needs some medical attention, but the fetus was in his briefcase.
He gave an abortion to her?
Correct.
Himself?
Yeah. Well, I don't know the details of, exactly what happened, but, that's the fetus in the briefcase is something that I won't forget.
And he was using the briefcase as transportation, or
he had it with him when we arrested him. He was in a vehicle.
Jeez, that's horrifying.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff like that happens that the regular person won't know, that's not something that, unless you're in the courtroom when that case was being tried, you're not going to know about things like that. The whole prostitution world. I remember people that were in civilian employees. I never heard a cop say this, but civilian employees at APD were like, "Why are you wasting time with these prostitutes? They're consenting adults." What a lot of people don't realize is that everybody that's involved in prostitution, human trafficking, I'm going to go out here and say 95% of the girls, their journey into prostitution started with sexual assault. So they were all sexually assaulted either by a family member or somebody close to them. And that's what led them down that path. The girls that we dealt with, the local girls, all of them were on drugs. People don't realize the way drugs work. You can make a lot of money selling drugs up here because, supply and demand, right? It takes longer to get here. A dab of heroin, like a nifty, this is like a $5 amount of heroin in the lower 48. Up here it's $50,
Jeez.
Just because of the transportation. And so we also, as part of that job, we also responded to heroin overdoses. So me and another detective, Lenny Torres, we would go to the hospitals whenever there was an overdose involving heroin to try to kind of get a handle on things.
You talk about the stuff that the general public doesn't know. Mm-hmm. Do you think that it would be beneficial or detrimental to the public's perception of their own city if they were given all the details? Or do you think that they should be given less?
So that's a very interesting question because obviously for things to work in the way our legal system is set up, especially in the cases that I'm talking about. So with drugs and prostitution, and drugs run a lot of the violence. I'm just going to say, we talked about drugs, we've talked about prostitution, we've talked about gangs. Drugs run a lot of the violence, and the way to combat that, the traditional way to combat that is, and this is a good segue into Metro, because even though we were doing it in Vice, the way you build a drug case is you get a confidential informant that's willing to work off something that to get consideration for a crime that they've done. They don't want to go to jail, so
less time.
I can buy heroin from this person, or back in the days it was crack. Do people even smoke crack anymore? I don't know. Like
I have no idea.
It's not as popular. Everybody's either doing clear or brown, right? Clear is meth, and brown is heroin. And I actually have bought crack before when I was working undercover, but now everything is either heroin or meth up here.
And just to clarify, by up here, do you mean Alaska? Oh, it's Alaska. Okay.
Alaska, right? Alaska. I'm speaking about Alaska and the things that APD deals with, right? So the way you make the drug cases, you get this confidential informant, you get them to agree to buy drugs, and you have to get what's a glass warrant, right? Which is, you get permission. Even the cops, they don't have permission to just record what's going on, right? So you've got to get permission to record what's going on. Typically, you'll have like an officer with them that's acting as an undercover. In the best case scenario, which happened a couple of times in my cases, that CI introduces the cop to the guy that's selling the drugs, and you do a hand directly with the person that's the drug dealer. And so you do that a couple of times, and then you have enough to make the case on the drug dealer. Typically, there's things that have to go into it to make sure that you have like chain of custody on the drugs and the money. Typically, the money's marked, right? So when you make the arrest,
What do you mean marked?
By marked, I mean, I guess that's like a colloquial way to say we record the serial numbers on the money so that when we arrest the person, we can find the money on them to prove that, like, hey, this is the money that we had before we did the deal, and they have that money on them.
Okay, so this is you guys as the police bringing the money in, doing the hand-to-hand.
Right.
Okay.
And then when we arrest the drug dealer, hey, we've got the drugs, they test positive, he's got the money, so on and so forth. And then...
So there's no reasonable doubt. It's like this
exactly. You're dead ass caught, right?
Yeah.
Like we have drugs that test positive for drugs, and now we're going to get a search warrant and go to your house and all that stuff. One of my goals was I was trying to take people's houses. And that's when we get to Metro. So that was what we did in Vice. When we got to Metro, it's like, bigger fish. You're dealing with the bigger fish, the bigger dealers. Someone said to me before, and I really believe this, if you're working drugs and you're not arresting people that are speaking Spanish, you ain't doing shit. And that's not, I don't want to slam my Spanish-speaking brothers and sisters, but, like, where do these drugs come from? Think about where these drugs come from, right?
Canada.
Right, they speak oui, bonbons, they speak French, bonjour, right? No, they're in South America, they're in Mexico, right? And so the people that are running this stuff, they're people from those countries, okay? So, in Anchorage, the drug unit that I was in was disbanded. It was a controversial thing. Lawsuits happened, the city got sued, the city lost. I'm not going to get into the details of that. But what it's argued is being done now is they're picking leaves, right? It's like you see a tree, like if you pick a leaf, there's going to be another leaf. The tree's going to keep on growing, right? You got to get to the roots of the tree. So you've got to work cases that, you have to deal with the drug problem is a really difficult problem. You know what I mean? So I talk about the danger and the violence caused by the drugs that are being brought in from these Spanish-speaking countries, but even weed, I know weed is legal now, right? I got to the point where, like, I made cases when I was working drugs where, on a patrol level as well, you'd have people with, 100 plants, we had this grow underneath this person's house where we had to, false floor and, you dig in and there's all these plants, like, and you get them to admit that they're actually selling them. Wow, so this is a felony, nothing was done, the court has turned a blind eye. Of course, you could remember before it was legal, right? You could have it, you couldn't sell or buy it, but like if the weed fairy came to your house, then, oh yeah, you have it, right? No, it was a situation where, I didn't want anything to do with it as far as cases because I knew it'd be a lot of hard work and it wouldn't go anywhere.
A lot of paperwork.
Right. Paperwork, like I was talking about before. That being said, there's been homicides over weed, right? Because, okay, so why don't people just go to 4th Avenue and get weed from that store? Or there's lots of different dispensaries, legal, right? Legal dispensaries all over the place. Why don't people just go there? The people are still buying their weed from the guy in the corner that sold it before weed became legal because guess what? He's charging less than those places. There's still a gray market for weed, right? And when people know that guy has money, he's going to get robbed.
He's going to be a target.
He's going to be a target, right? Home invasion robbery is going to be, because of, hey, that guy that sells the weed, he has the money.
How has policing in Anchorage changed over the last 20 years?
There's been a lot of different advances in technology. Obviously, when I started policing, there was no computers, and now.
And what year was that you started policing?
97.
97, okay.
Yeah, from 97 to 2017. The way technology has evolved, police have a lot more technology at their fingertips than they had before. So I think that's a really good thing as far as being able to get information really rapidly. Really, and this is going to be stupid, Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat are really great because people talk about the stuff that they do, and it's really helpful in as far as developing intelligence, Officers can just look at people's Snapchat, and there was a case where, so just down the street at 15th and E, a guy committed a homicide, and I was working warrants at the time, and so as a negotiator, they called me up. They're like, "Hey, SWAT's in the woods looking for this guy. Can you get on the phone and talk to him to try to get him to turn himself in?" So, like I always do, I go on Facebook to see if there's some type of intel, like, maybe like, okay, I'll see something on his page that he likes, something he cares about, so that you can develop a hook to create a rapport with him. When I go on his Facebook Live from like 20 minutes prior is him basically admitting that he did the murder and he was going to go away for a long time, but that he wasn't a bad guy. And you could tell it was dark, like he was going through Valley. So it happened at like 15th and E, and you could tell he was running through Valley of the Moon Park while he's giving this narration on the Facebook Live, 20 years ago, like the homicide detectives would have to do that shit the old fashioned way. They wouldn't have a person giving a confession to it. I mean, and don't get me wrong, there's still stuff that they had to do. As far as there's still work that they had to do, but that makes it a lot easier when you have somebody on Facebook giving a confession to the stuff that they did.
In your experience, why would somebody do that?
Why do people put anything on Facebook? I mean, people put their life story on Facebook. I think maybe they want to feel important. People just they want to, hey, look at me. And, it's kind of like a millennial thing, look at me, look what I'm doing, or, oh, like I got into an argument with my boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever,
Like this dude did it for clout or something.
It was an argument over drugs, it was an argument over drugs.
But as far as the Facebook Live video.
Live, yeah, I'm sure he felt empowered maybe, but.
Because he basically just snitched on himself.
Exactly. We don't catch the smart ones, which, it's unfortunate that someone had to lose their life, but it was good that he kind of foobarred himself into jail with that Facebook Live.
So perspective has a tendency to shape a person's understanding of reality. Is there something you wish people knew about the reality of crime in Anchorage to help them better understand it?
You're talking about the perceptions. It's interesting because I grew up in New York City, and when you look at the per capita statistics, Anchorage is more dangerous, because if you look at just the raw numbers, your chances of being involved in a crime are a lot higher here, especially when it comes to sexual assault and things like that, which we lead in. But I guess what I would want people to know is, let's talk person crimes. And by person crimes, I mean assaults, rapes, robberies. People think of robbery as their house getting robbed. Robbery is like when someone takes something from you by force. Burglary is like your house being burglarized when someone breaks in your house and takes something from it. So the person crimes, right? Murder, obviously, rape, robbery, and assaults. People can protect themselves by not being in areas where that stuff occurs. And know that the news and the media, they're trying to sell papers. So, they're going to make things sound as onerous as possible so that they can generate excitement and a buzz so that the people that are paying them to put commercials on the screen will keep on paying them. But know that if you're not hanging out in places where these things occur, if you're not, drinking and being in areas where there are other criminals, the chances of that stuff happening is I mean, they're going to be a lot lower if you're, just trying to live your best life. And I think that people worry about that. Now, if you notice, I made a qualification with that. I talked about the person crimes, meaning like homicides, rapes, robberies, things of that nature. And that stuff could still happen, within families. A lot of the sexual assaults that happen are within families. A lot of the homicides, if they're not like the gang-related ones we were talking about earlier, they're typically the ones where they're within families or people that they knew. On the other side, you have the property crimes, SB 91. First of all, the politicians that voted for that shit are not your friends, right? SB 91 is a system based on a bill that was passed in San Francisco. And, we're going to save all this money, right? In San Francisco, you have criminals that will come across the border to commit property crimes because they know they're not going to go to jail. When I was in warrants, this was right before SB 91 came into effect, you would hear, and criminals are, there's lawyers and then criminals are right under them. And in some instances, right over them as far as how well they know the law. Mm-hmm. And when I worked in warrants, we had to work in jail one day a week in jail court. And so you could hear criminals talking to their lawyers. And criminals would tell their defense attorneys, hey, I want you to continue this case. I'll waive time. We need a continuance because when SB 91 comes into effect, I'll get out. Whereas if we take this deal, we try it now, I'll get jail time. And that's exactly how stuff worked,
I know that SB 91 is very complicated. What is the relationship? Like, what is your relationship as an officer and a detective? What is your relationship with SB 91?
What SB 91 did was it really handcuffed officers. I mean, because obviously people do bad things and we want to put them in jail, right? And that's what the public wants, in the thought that, okay, crime is gonna diminish if the people that are doing the crimes are in jail. They made some things that were felonies, not felonies. They made some things where we would put this person in jail, where now we're just going to give them a summons to go to court. That's the gist of, getting away from all the complexity of it. That really was the gist of it.
I've heard a lot of things about SB 91. I definitely need to talk to an attorney.
Talk to an attorney. Yeah, you should have an attorney on the podcast.
Yeah.
As a cop, it's like, okay, you can't arrest that guy. Okay,
Yeah. So you're really stuck between a rock and a hard place.
And that was towards the end of my career. I mean, I retired in 2017. So I'm like, okay, that's what it is. That's what it is.
Yeah. So there are a relatively small amount of careers out there where you tend to encounter people on the worst day of their life. I think it's safe to say that law enforcement is one of those careers. Did you learn anything about people after consistently seeing them at their worst?
Yeah, and this is gonna sound I think people universally, and this is gonna sound really Gandhi-ish and kumbaya, whatever, but like I think people universally are good and they want the same things, and part of why I became a negotiator was because I always strive to have a connection with people. And as a negotiator, I talk to a lot of people on the worst days of their life. One of the negotiations I'll remember is, I'll never forget it. There was a guy sitting on the roof of the JCPenney's parking garage with his legs hanging over, and he was kind of pushing up with his arms, and he was going to go. And he wouldn't talk to me. So
were you up there with him?
Yeah, I was up there with him because, of course, I got there first. And he was upset because I think he had like a sexual assault history, and OCS wouldn't let his kids be with him. And his girlfriend was up there as well. And, she's crying. He is, in my mind, he's ready to jump. One of the things that people don't realize is that whenever you're in a situation like that, you're in crisis as well. And that's something that cops don't do. They don't give themselves permission to be human, a lot of them, I mean, it's gotten better, but there's more cop deaths by suicide than by people shooting them. And that's something, police as well as the military, the culture needs to change. I don't want to get a soapbox on it, but I don't want to get on a soapbox about it, but that's something that has to change. There were people in the in Town Square, because you could see him on the edge from Town Square, that are yelling at him to jump, So I've got to get people, I'm on the radio getting people to move back and hey, shut those people up, And so obviously this guy's the worst day of his life, ultimately I was able to talk him off the roof. And, it was because he wanted what he wanted, but didn't know how to get it, didn't develop the tools. A lot of people don't develop the tools to get what they want. Another situation where it was a medical call where, the person wasn't breathing. It was by Noosa Guy, those apartments over there. And it's husband and wife. The wife isn't breathing. Medics got there really quick. They put what's called the geezer squeezer, which is basically a device that does CPR, and she was gone. And so he was devastated. And the medics leave, of course, so it's just me and him. And I'm supposed to, I'm like, I have to comfort this guy. I had no words. Mm-hmm. They had been married for 30 years or something like that. And I had no words, for him, and I said some stuff, but, how does She's in a Better Place sound? You know what I mean? You can't, I just sat with him and processed it, but, knowing that in lots of things, you're Band-Aid there. You know what I mean? People have gaping wounds because of loss, and you're just a Band-Aid at that point. You're not going to solve any problems. You're not really going to help. I work in behavioral health now. So, obviously this is something that is important to me. I'm helping people in that realm, but you're not, all you can do is be there with them. So at the end of the day, people are all human. They want the same things. They want happiness. And, we don't have a lot of time here. So you have to live it. You have to live every day, to its fullest.
Yeah.
I tell my kids, go out and conquer.
Every day?
Everybody doesn't want to conquer. You have to conquer. Every day you have to conquer.
Yeah.
Because you don't know how many days you have left. And I think that's because, me and wifey, this is what we do, and so we see people, she's a detective as well.
Is she still a detective?
She's still a detective. Yeah.
Okay.
And so we see this, we see people at our worst. So it's you want to see the other side. You want to see people not limiting themselves, not just being spectators in life, but actually going forth and conquering, doing more.
Yeah.
Whatever it is that makes their heart beats fast, that doesn't hurt other people, do that, be that. And so I think that's the perspective I got from seeing so many people on the worst days of their lives.
That's great. You mentioned the effect or the toll that takes on the officer or the person in law enforcement. What can you tell me about the men and women who protect this city?
The men and women that protect Anchorage are awesome. That's what I want to say first. And what I mean by that is law enforcement is a difficult job. It's not one that I would choose for my kids. Obviously, if any of them wanted to do it, I'd have their back, but I would try to convince them to do other things. It's a job where you get compensated financially, but everybody that you see out there in a uniform, they could probably make more money doing other things and do a job that is less stressful. But it's a profession that you really don't choose. It chooses you, and so all of them are really choosing to put their lives in danger to protect other people. And in this day and age, they're kind of reviled for it at times. I think it's gotten worse, way worse since when I started, as far as the public dissatisfaction with police, and which is a shame, Anchorage is better than other places. There's a fair share of people that are pro cop, but there's a vast majority that aren't. And I think that with the proliferation of dash cam footage and other things, and the body cam footage that's showing police malfeasance in other states, people let that affect here. I remember there was a Black Lives Matter movement. They had a rally up here. The chief kind of got in front of it. The chief at the time, Chief Tolley, he got in front of it. He went out and met with the local leader of the movement. Like, you went to her Facebook, like her profile pic was her and the chief. There's really a willingness to be transparent and sit down and really talk about the issues that were on people's minds. Yeah, I think that across the country, yeah, sure, there are cops that are doing things that they're not supposed to do, and you can hope that they get dealt with as far as court cases, jail time if necessary, losing their jobs. But I think that the public lets that color their perception of Anchorage cops. And it's like, okay, I get it. If you had an issue where an Anchorage cop did something that he wasn't supposed to do, yeah, by all means, report him to who he needs to be reported to. But by and large, this department, and I'm from New York City, so I go back east a lot. You've got a good department here with a lot less corruption than in other places. And like I said, the people that wear the uniform here, they're awesome because they're doing a job where, as hard as it is to get on, as hard as it is to get on, because I worked in background, so I know the hurdles you have to jump through. And there's many officers from other states that try to be cops up here because they were already cops there, couldn't cut the mustard. When I was working in backgrounds, out of every 1,000 people that try to become a member of APD, one person got through.
Really?
Yeah. So, I mean, the people you see around here wearing uniforms and wearing a badge for APD, they're quality people, and it took them a lot to get where they are. And like I said, pretty much all of them could be making more money if they were doing something different.
That's great. I think that wraps it up.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Unless there's something else that you wanted to say.
I guess in closing, we talked a little bit about the crime people see, the crime that people don't see. And, there's that saying that it takes a village. Like, there was a big part of my career where I was speaking about when I was in robbery assault, where people knew what was going on, but that they wouldn't cooperate with the police. In closing, I would say that, 10% of the crime that happens is where the police get involved, right? Because, there's 90% of the stuff that doesn't even get seen. What I think people could do to help take pride in your neighborhoods and make them a safer place by being vigilant and not condoning it. That's the way to help the police. I'm not telling people to go out and be vigilantes and police themselves, but, hey, you can make those anonymous calls. Make it to where people that deal drugs aren't more revered than the person that just got their college degree. Promoting positive things and maybe not giving so much props to negative things. And I'm saying it just like that because that's what people do. They give props to negative things. Oh, wow, cool. Check out these sneakers. Check, how'd you get them? Hey, I was scrambling. No, that shouldn't be acceptable. Mm-hmm. And so I think that if people all over did their best to make their neighborhood safe and make them great, then that you asked me a question that will lead to a whole other show because, it's all about responsibility and, men taking care of their families. There's a bunch of stuff, but I guess I'll say that for the next time you have me on here.
All right. That sounds good. Well, thanks, Aaron. I really appreciate it, man. This has been great.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.
Lost Anchorage is written, hosted, and produced by me, Cody Liska, for Crude Magazine. Music is by Michelle McLaughlin. For more information about how you can support local grassroots journalism, go to www.patreon.com/Crude Magazine. Thank you to Trina Duber, Seward Brewing Company, David North, Crystal Liska, Derek Adolph, Blue and Gold Board Shop, Shane Robinson, and Sharon Liska for supporting this podcast at the company man level.